I grew up in Ghana watching a show titled By the Fireside, where the host, Grace Omabo, popularly known as Mame Dokno, narrated stories to the children sitting around the bonfire and her viewing audience at home. We may have thought of these precious moments as passing time, but as an adult and a teacher, I have come to realize how important By the Fireside was. I realized, thanks to Grace Omabo, that when you deprive children of stories, you leave them unscripted and anxious stutterers in their actions as well as in their words, because to know who you are is to understand the story or stories that we are a part of. Most authentic leaders were storytellers. The reason is because what makes a leader is the ability to tell a particular kind of story, one that explains ourselves to ourselves and gives power and resonance to a collective vision. Gandhi, for example, spoke about the dignity of India and nonviolent protest. Martin Luther King Jr. told of how a great nation is colorblind. Moses told a series of interlinked stories extending over time, from Abraham and Sarah's journey from Mesopotamia to Moses himself and the Israelites wandering in the desert, a story that we are part of. You realize that the act of storytelling is fundamental to understanding why Torah is the kind of book that it is. A large part, if you pay careful attention to it, a large part of what Moses is doing in the book of Deuteronomy is retelling a story to the next generation, reminding them of what God did for their parents and of some of the mistakes their parents made. Moses, as well as being the great liberator, is also the supreme storyteller. For example, he tells the people that when they enter, conquer, and settle the land, they must bring the first fruits to the temple as a way of giving thanks to God. Each person had to make a declaration when they brought the first fruits. What was their declaration? Pay attention to this. My father was a wandering Aramean. He went down to Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, but there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm, and awesome power, and by signs and wonders. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Here, for the first time, retelling of the nation's history becomes an obligation for every citizen of the nation. In this act, Hebrews were commanded to become a nation of storytellers. It's amazing, but in this short declaration is the entire history of the nation compressed in summary form. In the few short sentences, what we have here is, number one, the patriarchal origins in Mesopotamia, the emergence of the Hebrew nation in the midst of history rather than in mythic prehistory, slavery in Egypt and liberation therefrom. We have the climatic acquisition of the land of Israel, and throughout, the acknowledgement of God as Lord of history. Now, do you know that biblical Hebrew has no word that means history? The closest equivalent is Divrei Hayamim, which is Chronicles. Instead, biblical uses the root zakor, meaning remember. That is why time and time again, this is important, time and time again in the book of Deuteronomy, throughout Deuteronomy, comes the command to remember. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt. Remember what Amalek did to you. Remember what God did to Miriam. Remember the days of old. Consider the generations long past. Ask your father and he will tell you, your elders, and they will explain to you. There is a fundamental difference between history and memory and to remember. What is the fundamental difference? History is an account of events that happened sometime to someone else. We are asked to remember. That is memory, not history. What is memory? When somebody says remember, it is the past internalized and made part of my identity. Throughout Deuteronomy, Moses warns the people no less than 14 times not to forget. If they forget the past, they will lose their identity and sense of direction, and disaster will follow. Moreover, not only are the people commanded to remember, they are also commanded to pass that memory down to their children. This entire phenomenon represents a remarkable cluster of ideas about identity as a matter of collective memory, about the ritual retelling of the nation's story, and above all, about the fact that every one of us is a guardian of that story and memory. It is not the leader alone or some elite who are trained to recall the past, but every one of us. Great leaders tell the story of the group, but the greatest of leaders, for example, Moshe, taught the group to become a nation of storytellers. You can still see the power of this idea today.